Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Over the last few weeks, we've been exploring different aspects of living in remission, from navigating the healthcare system to staying steady in a culture that doesn't always make it easy. This week, we're going to tackle something that every single one of us will face sooner or later: disruptions. I'm talking about the things that throw our routines off track: travel, unexpected illness, stressful deadlines, changes in family dynamics, or even good things like celebrations or big life transitions. Sometimes it's the little interruptions that catch us off guard. Other times, it's the big life events that shake our sense of stability. And here's the thing: it's not just about willpower. Neuroscience tells us that the brain loves patterns and predictability. When those patterns are disrupted, our brain has to work harder, and that extra load can make it harder to keep up the choices that keep us well. This is because predictable routines run through what neuroscientists call the default mode network and habit loops, areas of the brain that handle automatic behaviors without conscious effort. Disruption forces the brain to shift into the executive control network, which requires more energy, attention, and emotional regulation. That shift alone can double the amount of glucose your brain needs. And if you're already stressed, your mental fuel tank may be low. So, today we're going to talk about why disruptions can feel so destabilizing, how to spot the earliest warning signs that things might be slipping, and what you can do in small, doable ways to protect your progress. And of course, we'll talk about how our community can help you hold steady so you're not trying to swim through the turbulence alone. Let's get started. Our brains are pattern making machines. Predictability saves energy because the brain can run on established pathways without having to make fresh decisions all the time. This is why, once a healthy pattern is established, it often feels easier to stick to it in familiar surroundings. Neuroscience research shows that basal ganglia circuits in the brain are responsible for many of our automatic behaviors. When a routine is stable, these circuits take over, allowing the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision making and self control, to rest more often. But when a disruption happens, whether it's a sudden change in your environment, your schedule, or your stress level, the brain has to switch from autopilot to active problem solving. This engages the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex, which monitor conflict and help you adapt. That switch uses more oxygen and glucose, and it ramps up activity in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA, axis, which controls your stress hormones. At the same time, those well worn habit pathways can get interrupted. Instead of flowing along your normal routine, you now have to make decisions at each step. And that's where decision fatigue can creep in. Studies show that decision fatigue reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, making us more likely to choose whatever feels easiest or most familiar, even if that's not what we truly want. From a neuroscience perspective, this means disruptions aren't just inconvenient, they're biologically harder. When you understand that, you can approach them with more compassion for yourself and more realistic expectations. One of the best ways to protect your progress is to notice the earliest signs that a disruption is affecting you. Sometimes those signs are emotional. You might feel more irritable, anxious, or flat than usual. These mood changes often come from a shift in neurotransmitter balance, like lowered serotonin or dopamine from disrupted routines. Sometimes it shows up as mental chatter, more internal debates about your choices, more bargaining with yourself, or a stronger pull toward old patterns. This chatter often comes from the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, activating more often. The amygdala tries to pull you toward comfort behaviors when it senses instability, even if those behaviors don't align with your long term goals. Another early sign is a quiet drift away from your support system. You might skip check ins, avoid group calls, or tell yourself you'll reach out later. Neuroscience tells us that isolation increases activity in the brain regions associated with self focus and negative rumination, making it harder to regulate emotions. In our community, we see time and time again how catching these signs early can turn a potential slide into just a small bump in the road. When life gets disrupted, it's tempting to think you need to hold on to everything exactly as it was, but that's often unrealistic. A more effective approach is to focus on your non negotiables, the few small things that help you feel stable, no matter what else is going on. From a brain perspective, these non negotiables work because they reactivate habit pathways in the basal ganglia, even if only partially. That partial activation helps keep your recovery identity intact and reduces the sense of being off track. These might be micro habits, actions so small you can still do them even in chaos. Micro habits rely on procedural memory, the brain's long term memory for skills and actions, which is less effective by stress than the parts of the brain that handle complex decision making. And here's the mindset shift that makes this work. In a disruption, the goal isn't perfection, it's stabilization. This keeps your neuroplasticity moving in the right direction because your brain continues reinforcing the identity and routines of a person in recovery. When things settle down, you can smoothly return to your full routine without feeling like you're starting over. One of the most powerful protections during disruptions is staying connected to a recovery oriented community. From a neuroscience perspective, being around others who are calm and steady can help regulate your own nervous system. This is called co regulation. It happens because of mirror neuron systems in the brain, which allow us to match the emotional state of those around us. In our community, you can also borrow hope when yours feels low. This works because hearing others' success stories activates the ventral striatum, the brain's reward center, which boosts motivation and confidence. And then there's collective problem solving. You don't have to figure it all out alone. Someone else might have navigated the exact disruption you're facing, and when they share their solution, your brain forms a vicarious learning pathway. This means you can benefit from their experience without having to go through it yourself, saving mental energy and stress. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, disruption will lead to setbacks. That doesn't mean you failed, it means you're human. First step is to let go of shame as quickly as possible. Shame activates the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, which are also activated during experiences of physical pain. That means shame is literally painful for the brain and it drains the energy you need for recovery. Next, Look at the disruption itself. What specifically threw you off? Was it a change in environment, an emotional trigger, or losing access to your usual support? Identifying the trigger helps engage the prefrontal cortex, which is better at planning and problem solving than the emotional centers of the brain. And finally, we start with compassion. When you speak to yourself with warmth, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, your body's rest and repair mode, which makes it easier to think clearly, feel steady, and take action. Before we close, I want you to spend a few minutes with these reflection prompts. First, what are your top 3 non-negotiables during a disruption? Think about them in terms of brain anchoring. Which small actions would keep your habit pathways active, even when everything else feels unstable? Second, how can you tell when you're drifting away from your support system? Write down the emotional, behavioral, or thought-based cues that would tell you it's time to reconnect before you lose momentum. And third, when have you successfully navigated a disruption before? Reflect on what made that possible. When you recall those past wins, you're activating your brain's hippocampus and reward networks, strengthening the neural link between challenge and success. Disruptions are part of life. They're not a sign that something's gone wrong with you or your recovery. By focusing on stability instead of perfection, anchoring in small actions, and staying connected to your community, you can protect your progress even when life gets messy. And remember, you're not doing this alone. Every single person here knows what it's like to have their routines shaken. Together, we can help each other, not just survive disruptions, but come out on the other side stronger. Thank you for listening.